Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Let me welcome you to the Digital UK and Ireland FP&A board. Today we'll be speaking about the topic of shift from traditional to better and beyond budgeting. My name is Olga Rudakova. I'm the data skills trainer and FP&A board ambassador. I will be happy to facilitate this meeting for you tonight. I have very good news to start. We have around 300 registrations for the event. 51% of people attending will be very senior practitioners and 41% middle management. So quite a senior audience tonight. 76% are coming from UK and Ireland region as expected, but the rest are joining from 31 different countries worldwide. So very happy to be here tonight with you. Let me walk you through the agenda for the event. We'll be speaking tonight about actually what beyond budgeting is and why better budgeting won't work. We'll have two practical cases tonight. We'll look at Danone's journey from budget to rolling forecasts and beyond. And we will look at HP journey beyond budget with continuous planning. At the end, we will speak about technology as an enabler for better and beyond budgeting. We'll end our session with conclusions and recommendations, and we will take Q&A session. Let me remind you about previous meetings in the UK and Ireland region. And I'm pretty sure that tonight's session will be a nice addition to this nice list. And now it is my pleasure and honor to introduce our speakers for tonight. So my dear panelists, please join me on the webcam. And I'm happy to introduce our first speaker for tonight, Dr. Steve Morlich. Steve is a performance management thought leader and author. Steve will be speaking tonight about what the beyond budgeting is and why better budgeting won't work. Steve is based in Redhill in the UK. He's a member of London FP&A board, and he's a corporate performance management thought leader. He's a former chairman of the Beyond Budgeting Roundtable, and he's author of many books on beyond budgeting, business forecasting, operational forecasting, and performance reporting. Steve, we are very happy to have you here with us.
Thank you very much, Olga. So if we can start, what I'm going to be...
Let's introduce the rest of the speakers, and I give the stage to you, Steve. Our second speaker for tonight will be Ivo de Brouwer. Ivo is a finance director of controlling methodologies at Danone. He will be speaking tonight about Danone's journey from budget to rolling forecasts and beyond. Ivo is based in Tilburg in Netherlands. He's a member of the Amsterdam FP&A board. He's a business controlling, FP&A, accounting, auditing professional with more than 20 years of experience. He's an expert in data management, visualization, financial and strategic planning, and building and managing international teams. Ivo, I'm glad to have you here tonight.
Thanks for your nice words, Olga, and it's my pleasure to be with all of you tonight.
The next speaker to introduce is Manish Gundecha. Manish is a FP&A director, personal systems finance at HP. Manish is based in Houston, in USA. He's a senior finance and accounting leader with more than 20 years of experience. He's an expert in internal audit, controllership, program management, FP&A, and shared services. Manish is a finance executive who gives back to our society by sharing his extensive experiences and his LinkedIn posts and articles. Manish, glad to have you here tonight.
Thanks, Olga. Happy to be here as well.
And the last person to introduce will be Pras Chatterjee. Pras is a Senior Director at SAP. Pras will be speaking tonight about technology, how it can enable better or beyond budgeting. Pras is based in Toronto, Canada. He's a multiple FP&A trend speaker. He's a business financial performance management professional with more than 20 years of experience. He's an expert with strong finance and systems knowledge gained in various organizations. Pras, happy to have you here.
Hi, Olga. Happy to be here and looking forward to this great panel as well.
Thank you, dear panelists. You can turn off your cameras for a while, and we have a couple of more slides to cover before we really jump into the session. So please put your cameras off and I will move on. Let me introduce to you projects and initiatives of the FP&A Trends Group. So you can read through it in your own pace and see maybe something will be of interest to you as well. Meanwhile, what we can expect tonight, we have 90 minutes webinar in front of us. We expect your active participation through 4 real-time polls. We will have Q&A session at the end, so you can actually start sending your questions via chat box right now and through the whole evening. A presentation is already available at the handouts section of this webinar, and obviously we will share it with you again in 2 days together with the recording. At the end, we will ask you for a short feedback, which is very important for us. Don't leave without giving it. All right, let's move on. And it's time for me to thank our technology partner, SAP. As we all know, it's one of the world's leading providers of modern FP&A solutions. Thank you, SAP, for making this event possible. And it's finally time for me to jump into the topic, from traditional to better and beyond budgeting. I'm pretty sure that many of you have noticed some downsides of traditional budgeting even before COVID pandemic, but still it somehow worked and we kept budgeting. But exactly the pandemic times and post-pandemic economy has shown us that traditional budgeting is no longer fit for the task. At first, we tried to keep our budgets up to date. So we kept updating and reworking them. But by the time the next version was out, it was already outdated. So after several months of experimenting, CFOs and FP&A professionals found that we actually need an alternative. We still need to strategically allocate our resources. We still need to control and manage our business. But what this alternative can be? I'm pretty sure that many of you see this need, and our latest FP&A Trends survey has shown us that many FP&A professionals realize the need of better forecasting, better budgeting, better strategic planning. These will be key areas of the investment in post-pandemic recovery. Let's speak about these alternatives to traditional budgeting. And we will start by answering the question, what beyond budgeting is? Who else can answer this question better than Dr. Steve Morlich? Steve, please join me on the webcam whenever you're ready. Stage is yours.
Thank you very much, Olga. So let's get stuck in. I'm going to be talking to you about 4 things today. One is why we have to think about beyond budgeting, and that's because basically you can't improve budgeting by doing the wrong things righter, but you still have to do, as Olga mentioned, a whole series of control tasks, and it's about finding a better way to do the same things, but also recognizing that you can't just address process and control items in isolation. They impact and are impacted by a lot of behavioral and cultural things. And the way into this is through the 12 Beyond Budgeting principles, which effectively is a set of ingredients to help you build a better business model for your business. And so this is not a recipe, it's more like a set of ingredients and guidelines to help you do that. But why listen to me, you might say? Well, first reason for doing that is I've worked in this area for 20 years, and all the mistakes that it's possible to make, I've made. But I've seen the light. I got into Beyond Budgeting some 20 years ago, and I've led a Beyond Budgeting implementation in Unilever, so a very large professional company. And since I left Unilever, I've spent a lot of time getting to grips with the kind of practical issues that you have to master if you're going to make this journey from traditional budgeting into Beyond Budgeting. But before I talk a little bit more about that, let's just reprise why we need to change. So the 4 major problems we see with budgeting, and why some of the alternatives that are touted I don't think are really a solution. And there are really 4 things. 1, it's very obviously bureaucratic and costly. Secondly, it's difficult to do the right things because by establishing a fixed annual plan, you lose the flexibility to respond to things that you hadn't anticipated. Thirdly, it encourages people to do the wrong things because the way that you win in a budgeting system is to negotiate the lowest revenue target you can do and not to exceed it, or to negotiate the largest budget you can and make sure you spend it all. And last but not least, it distorts perception of performance because you're comparing yourself against an arbitrary target which is out of date, usually before the budget is actually put to bed. And what we've seen over the last 20 years is kind of at the beginning, the major concern was on the left-hand side. We're trying to improve the process, but now more than in the past, I think people recognize the role that budgeting plays in driving dysfunctional behaviors and not supporting the right performance culture. So those are the major reasons. Now, how to fix it, and that's what our next slide is really addressing. Well, as I say, a number of years ago, we started off on the left-hand side, and people talked about better budgeting, and what that really meant is trying to do the same thing but in a more administratively efficient way, or trying to do the same thing but more frequently. But that doesn't really address any of the which I think are the more important issues on the right-hand side. The other alternative, which became back into fashion 2 or 3 years ago, was zero-based budgeting, which is what I'll address next. And before I talk about this, just when I say zero-based budgeting, I mean it in the proper sense of the word, which is building a budget from zero base. I think there's been a lot of confusion because what large consultancies tend to do when something becomes fashionable is to take what they already do, tweak it a little bit and slap the new fashionable name on it. I'm talking here about real zero-based budgeting. And that really tries to tackle one of the issues to do with the third major problem, which is to do with the tendency for cost budgets in particular to ratchet upwards year after year. But it doesn't really address any of the other problems. And indeed, it makes the whole process more bureaucratic and more costly than ever before. So what is beyond budgeting? So I'm going to address this in this next slide. Beyond budgeting is a set of 12 principles. On the right-hand side, you'll see that there's a set 6 process principles, which is about ways in which you can steer a business. And on the left-hand side, we've got what we call leadership or organizational principles, which is addressing how organizations are led and organized. And these 2 things come together to describe and define an organization's management model. So what this is saying quite clearly is that eliminating budgets isn't an end in itself, but it's an important means as a way to creating organizations that are less bureaucratic, more agile, and less prone to dysfunctional behavior. Now, sometimes people worry about this and they think it's a kind of all or nothing thing. And what I want to do over the next 2 or 3 slides is just to explain to you why that's not the case and why this is not as risky as it first sounds. So I'm going to address here the 6 process principles, and our fundamental philosophy behind our approach is that there are 6 things that a traditional budget does, and the problem, one of the major reasons why traditional budgeting doesn't work is you're trying to serve 6 different principles, 6 different purposes through one process. So what we do is we pull those apart and we say what we need is different sub-processes for each of those purposes. And so that's the way we tackle beyond budgeting. And in particular, to start off with, we focus on the top 3: how you target, how you forecast, and how you allocate resources. Why? Because they're at the heart of the steering process, but more importantly, they're very different processes with very different purposes. Targets is about aspirations, forecast is about expectations, and resource allocation is about intent. So these are very different processes, and they're driven by different numbers. And so this is very often the best way into beyond budgeting, tackling those 3 things. But we can make the journey even easier by seeing it not as one big jump from beyond budgeting from budgeting to not beyond budgeting, but we can see it as a series of stages where you progress from the left-hand side to the right-hand side. So the left-hand side is traditional fixed budgeting, where you've got single point numbers, all of which agree with each other, and they're locked within a financial year. The first step is, as I've said already, is to disaggregate that so that you separate the processes by their purpose. The step after that is to break out of the straitjacket of the financial year, because businesses don't end on the December 31st and start again on January the 1st. It's a continuous process. And finally, to bring more external data into the management processes, because ultimately the goal is to win. It's not to hit a fixed number. So that's why we talk about beyond budgeting as being a journey and not a destination. But that could run the risk of getting too fragmented. So we're working on developing a tool to help people manage what can be quite a complex change process. And so we tend to talk about this, which is what we're now calling a viable management model map. So you can see down the left-hand side, we've got the 12 principles, and in the grid in the center of the map, we've got post-it notes which represent either the current position that exists within the company or the desired position. And the idea is to move by a series of measured and controlled steps from the left-hand side more towards the right-hand side, in a way so that you end up with a management model which works for your business. And the key step is, if you could just advance to the final slide, is that as a whole, what you're planning to do is coherent. So there's rough vertical alignment. It doesn't need to be exact vertical alignment, but if you've got one of your management processes that's on the right-hand side of the map and everything else which is on the left-hand side of the map, that won't work because your model as a whole isn't coherent. So I'm going to leave it there and hand you back to Olga.
Thank you so much, Steve. Thank you for sharing this presentation, and thank you for actually breaking down for us this kind of scary and risky jump into concrete steps. Let me invite all other panelists to join me on the camera. Put your microphones on, and I'm very interested to hear what you think. I will start with you, Ivo. What would be your commentary?
Now, first of all, thanks, Steve, and I think you presented a very clear story to us, which I do recognize from practice. The key thing I want to repeat is what has been key also for our company. It's the ambiguity of a budget when you use it both for target setting and for forecasting, which actually causes all the issues. And that's indeed something that needs to be solved by splitting those processes. So thank you.
Thank you for your comment. And what do you think, Manish?
No, absolutely. First of all, thanks for sharing, Steve. I think the two definitely key takeaways for me. One is how you challenge the status quo. I know it's easier said than done. So you kind of challenge the status quo from a traditional budgeting to where you want to be. And secondly, what I kind of liked, and for me, key takeaway was the plan to get there rather than going from point A to point B. What's the plan? I think the step-by-step approach really helped me resonate with what we do here. So thank you.
And thank you, Manish. Price, what would you say?
Yeah, Steve, I mean, thanks for a great presentation, and especially thanks for touching on zero-based budgeting and really bringing that up. I think that's obviously a great start to a, beyond budgeting model, especially as you talked about how you build it up from ground up, starting from zero. And in my experience, I mean, doing this in a successful manner obviously involves having access to the right data points and right, cost elements and things like that. So it's clearly, makes sense that in terms of going forward on a beyond budgeting approach.
Thank you. Thank you so much, all the panelists, for all your comments. And it really brings us nicely to the next part of the session, polling question. That's where I want our audience to engage. So let us see the first poll for tonight. And I want to ask you, how long is your current budgeting process? So let me launch the poll. Please do vote. So how long is your current annual budgeting process? It might be that you don't even budget, or it is less than 1 month. It's between 1 and 3 months, or it is between 4 and 6 months, maybe even over 6 months. So what do you think? Please vote, share with us how is it going in your organization. I'll give you a bit more time, but it looks like we have a winner. I'm closing the poll and I'm sharing results with you. All right, let me ask some of our panelists, what do you think? Steve, what would be your commentary on the poll results?
Not surprising. I think what we've seen 15 years ago, we would have probably seen slightly bigger numbers in the 4 to 6 months box, and perhaps even more in the over 6 months box, which I think reflects the work that people within the software community, I think, have done in helping people to speed the process up. But sadly, not enough businesses have really tackled the issue of budgeting and its dysfunctionality, and so sad but not surprised.
Very nice commentary. That would I expect as well. And Ivo, can you tell us what do you think? What do you think about the poll result?
No, for me, I find it striking as well that indeed there's nobody answering we do not do budget. So it means that everybody is still working with a budget. That it's a time-intense process. That's what I truly recognize. Although that by itself is also creating the risk that whenever you come to an end result, that actually the world around you has changed. So it's already outdated before you started. And I think that's linking into the message of Steve in his presentation as well.
Thank you for the comment. I'm actually thinking that it's linking to your message as well. Let me hide the poll results and move on to Ivo's presentation. So we'll be speaking about Danone's journey from traditional to better and beyond budgeting. Ivo, the stage is yours.
So thank you very much, Olga. And yes, you're fully right. Hearing Steve before, I think we have walked a journey as a company, and it's nice to see, okay, how did it work in practice? But before I go into the journey, it might be good if I just give you a few highlights on the company itself to put it in perspective. So Danone is a big multinational, as you can see, over 100,000 employees, and present in most parts of the world. And you can see some of the biggest countries we operate in the flags here. If I then also look to in what kind of product divisions are we operating, it's basically split into three divisions. Firstly, specialized nutrition, which is containing of medical nutrition and early life nutrition. Then secondly, essential dairy and plant-based products. So it's mainly also the Danone brand and all others you see here. And lastly, the waters business as a third division. And in the bottom here, you can see in all of them, we have a significant role, let's say, in the world. So what does it mean for such a multinational to walk a journey from budgeting to rolling forecast? And I really want to start in the old days. A bit fortunate, I can really talk about those old days because I started in the company in 1999. And when I look in the beginning of my career, it was really possible for a company to predict the world and what would go on around there. Even in some circumstances, we could influence, let's say, the future. So looking in that context, it really makes sense that you make a yearly budget, and a few times a year, 2 or 3 times a year, you look and you see where are we deviating from this budget and how do we cope with that. But quite quickly after, we saw that the world was more and more changing. So we needed to adapt what we were doing. So we did 2 things, basically. Firstly, we went to a midterm mandate, which goes up to 3 years on top of the budget, to link in with Steve, because business doesn't stop at year end. And secondly, to prevent that in March already, let's say your budget is outdated, we introduced risks and opportunities, at least to make sure that if things are changing, we could slightly adapt the scenario of our forecast as well. And then as of 2016, we made a way bigger step. We found ourselves in a VUCA world. So the letter stands for volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. And in this VUCA world, we saw that it didn't work anymore to have a budget. So we really stopped budget. So we are part of the 0% of the pool, let's say. We kept the target, but really separated from any budget process. And we introduced rolling forecast, which basically meant that we were continuously looking 1.5 years in front of us, what we expect that could happen. Still managing risk and opportunities on top to have a bit of scenarios. And whilst keeping the midterm mandate, we introduced, let's say, full base scenarios on a best case and a worst case next to the expected situation. And then, and Olga mentioned that one, I think, COVID happened, and COVID changed everything. Basically, all that we had was not worth it anymore, and we had to reshape ourselves. We did 2 things. We're still working on that, basically, because it's quite a journey as well. But we looked at our organization. How can we be more close to business, more agile in this ever-changing world? And secondly, we wanted also to adapt our forecasting and targeting processes to not only go beyond budget, what we did with the rolling forecast, but also even a bit beyond a rolling forecast. And I will come back to that in a later stage. But first, let's look at the budgeting process, because I want to share with you some pros and cons, because also pros of the original budget period. Because having a 1-year phase really links nicely with the yearly negotiation of our customers. Secondly, it gives a clear mandate and a clear target in itself. And lastly, because you're not continuously updating, you can be a bit more efficient throughout the year. However, there are also disadvantages, and the main ones I want to mention here is business did not stop at year end. I told you about that. Also the second one, that it can be outdated quite quickly. And lastly, and that's the ambiguity we talked about before, that it's really, if you use it as a target and you use it as a forecast to take the right investment decisions going forward, it's not the best estimate you can have. So that's why we stopped budget and we moved into beyond budget into rolling forecast. As you see here, that we managed it in 2 phases. On a monthly base, we forecasted for 6 quarters out our financial KPIs in a finance to finance discussion. So really kept within finance. But every quarter we would go way deeper on the same time frame, but we would include the full financials and also the business plans behind. In the end, going from a general manager to general manager discussion, from country to zone to the company ultimately. So way more business discussion. And also for this process, there are some pros and cons that I want to highlight for you. In terms of the advantages, as you will see, then you see here there are three things I want to mention. Firstly, we always have an updated forecast at hand when we need to at local or global level. Secondly, creating such a forecast creates also business involvement to be able to prepare it. And for me, really, a good forecast is not a finance process. It's a business process, and finance can have an orchestrating role in it somehow. And lastly, the discussion between the organizational layer by itself creates a commitment, which is good. On the other side, it's a very time-consuming exercise. We many times had the feeling in our company that whenever you finished your previous rolling forecast, you can already start immediately in your next one without even having the chance to understand, okay, but what are we seeing here? What can we learn from that? How can we improve ourselves going forward in business? Secondly, still also a rolling forecast will have a political message in itself, because it's also the way you communicate between layers. So it's not only purely what do we expect. And lastly, and I don't think I have to elaborate on that, with a major disruption, okay, everything changes. It makes sense. So learning from that last situation, we have decided to keep in a rolling forecast process, but to go a bit beyond by expanding certain axes. And I want to share with you 4 of them. The first one is that we are running a process to connect to the max all the databases we have available, internal between our different functions in the company, but also combining it with external data coming from market share information, customer data, whatever we can get to be able to learn as much as we can for taking the right decisions going forward. Then a second point, we are even expanding more and more the use of non-financial data, and we have to. I'll give you one example. In one country, we had an issue that could have happened more often in the past. But because this issue really blew up into social media, actually, and it's true, within 1 year, we lost half of our business in that country. So today, in today's world, it's not only about your financial performance or your product. It's also about, okay, how are you perceived treating your environment? How are you perceived dealing with people? And it can have truly an impact on what you can expect going forward. Then the third one is one a bit mentioned before as well, is okay, need to focus more locally, being closer to business. And I can talk hours about decomplexifying the matrix organization. We'll not have the time here, but basically it means that we have been always organized into a geographical layer, and on the other hand also a product division layer. And what we are doing today is we are creating, instead of having 3 divisions in every country, to make that one country and really empower it to do the business close to where the business happens. And the last point I want to mention is need to focus on business, and it covers one of the disadvantages we saw in rolling forecast as we had it. We really want to reduce the frequency and the granularity of reporting to be able to increase the focus on scenarios of understanding where we can go, and to really animate business by trying to understand what we are doing. That was my last message before I'm happy to hand over to Olga.
Thank you so much, Ivo. Thank you for sharing your presentation and for actually walking us through your journey and sharing with us your thinking process and stages you made on your way. Before I ask all the panelists to join us on the camera, I will encourage our audience to send more questions through Q&A box, through the chat box. By the way, we are getting already many interesting questions. Thank you for that. Keep asking. All the participants, please join us, and I'm really interested to hear your commentary to Ivo's presentation. So Steve, I'll start with you. What do you think?
Well, I think Ivo hit the nail on the head with his last slide, really. It's clear that this isn't a binary thing, it's a journey, and you learn as you go along. You know, I'm gratified that amongst the things that Danone have learned is that this is a business thing, it isn't a finance process thing, and it's important to couple this with organizational change, and in particular clarity of ownership and devolution and local empowerment, because it's all about trying to get people locally to act like it's their business, but to do so in a way that that keeps the coherency of the organization as a whole. And also the fact that the recognition that external data is now much more available, but also really important information that you need for steering a business. So it's good stuff. Thank you.
Thank you, Stephen. Good comment. Manish, what do you think?
Oh, absolutely. First of all, I think it touches the chords, right chords for me, because I think we are on that journey ourselves on 18 months rolling forecast. So it's a good sense of connection. I think one key takeaway, if I will, is Ivo's example about how a non-financial impact, which impacted the reputation of the brand, also had a financial impact. So I think we more often than not, we as finance professionals don't think about those non-financial impact and how that kind of translates and impacts your income statement. So I think that was a good example for me. So thanks for sharing that, Ivo.
Thank you, Manish, for sharing your thoughts. And the last to comment on this presentation will be Pras. What are your ideas?
Yeah, great. Thanks so much, Ivo. I mean, it really covered everything in detail. I mean, a couple of things I took away was the fact that obviously with the rolling forecast, it was great how you outlined how you went away from a traditional budget, which, you know, even from your comments for Steve, and then when you described during your presentation, you effectively said that, you know, budget is outdated from the minute you publish it. And, you know, imagine those organizations, as we saw, spending 4 to 6 months on a budget. I mean, God forbid, I mean, you know, an incident like COVID happens where you stare at the budget and you're like, what do we do now? And all that time is effectively wasted. And I love the way how you outlined the types of rolling forecasts you do and how far you look into the future. And there's a couple of key things that it brought into perspective for me. The fact that it really brings in a lot of business involvement from a finance perspective. So it gives finance a seat at the table, as well as a lot of business involvement, as you mentioned. And the last thing, as Manish touched on, which is really important to me and dear to my heart, is you brought in the fact of non-financial data, looking at social media sentiment analysis. And, you know, I think more and more organizations really need to spend more time going beyond financial data, but expanding to non-financial data so that you can, you know, get a better pulse of where you are now and where you can be as well.
Very good. Thank you so much, Pras, for your comments. Thank you all of participants for your comments. And it's time for us to move on and look at the second polling question. Let's ask our audience, where is your company in terms of beyond budgeting? Let me launch this poll. So where is your company in terms of beyond budgeting? Not considering it, thinking about it, starting a beyond budgeting journey, or even have eliminated budgeting already. Please share how is it in your organization. More and more people are voting. Very nice. Let me close the poll and let me share the results with you. So we see an absolute winner thinking about it. I guess that's why you are here. Second option is not considering it. Then starting a beyond budgeting journey, 14%, very nice, and have eliminated budgeting, no one so far. Let me ask some of our panelists to comment on that. And I would ask you, Ivo, to start. What do you think about polling question results?
Yeah, so again, I am then the 1% in this case. Anyway, I think perhaps it's not even the most important if you are beyond budgeting. What I find most important and what I hope that you will remember from today is at least the impact of if you are not doing it. So what does it mean if you have a traditional budget, and do you know the risks? And at least the awareness is very important. Then secondly, Olga said, okay, thinking about it means that you are here. That's very good. And feel free, if you have any questions after, or you want to have some practical examples, you can also reach out to me on LinkedIn after, if you're seeking for some more, let's say, feed to take the right decisions. But okay, I hope today your thinking is a bit more clear after, and you might or might not decide consciously to move beyond.
A very nice commentary, very motivational, Ivo. And I will give the word to Manish. What are you thinking about these poll results?
Absolutely, Olga. Thank you. And I think it's a little bit of timing here for me. I think few years from now, if we run this poll again, I hope to see more and more percentages in that eliminated budget, hopefully. And I guess, if COVID is anything to learn from, I think one thing that's definitely, it's made it very clear, if I look at the poll results, is that there will be shocks in the system, if I can call them so, and that would make your budget and entire planning process outdated. So the sooner you move from your journey of traditional budgeting to beyond budgeting, I think the easier it would be for you to exist in that VUCA environment, as my friend Ivo highlighted here. So I think it's a good mixed bag, but the timing is what we kind of define in the future here, Olga, for me.
Thank you, Manish. Thank you for everyone who voted in the polling results. And we are moving on, and I give a word to Manish, speaking about HP's journey moving beyond budget with continuous planning. Manish, please join us on the webcam, and stage is yours.
Fantastic. Thank you, Olga. Thanks for the opportunity. So I think it's a perfect segue after what Ivo shared about rolling forecast. And I think what I want to kind of talk about HP's thinking beyond, in terms of beyond budget. Now, HP has already started on that journey a few years back, basically. Although, just to share, we've not completely eliminated budget per se right now. We're on that path. But there's something that we do, which I'm not sure how many companies kind of follow, but we kind of keep an eye out on continuous planning. And as I mentioned before as well, right, if there is something to learn from COVID, there's one important takeaway is that if you have a very static plan or a static budget, it kind of becomes outdated the very moment you have such an event occurring, and then you kind of look around as to what to do. Now, even before I get into some of the key aspects I want to touch into, I just want to have a frame of reference for all of us here is, most companies, if not all, start with something known as a long-term plan, a 3-year, 5-year, 10-year, depending on the industry in which you operate. That long-term plan then gets kind of divvied up or divided into annual budgets, a 12-monthly budget typically, right? So that's the second piece to the puzzle. And then the budget kind of gets, further broken down into either a monthly forecast or a quarterly forecast, again, depending in which the industry in which you operate, right? Now, our topic today is moving beyond budget with continuous planning. So HP is not different in that regard. Is once we have a budget, we kind of course have a monthly forecast, a quarterly forecast, etc. But we keep continually tracking it. And how do we do that and stay on top of our budget, just to keep pressure testing it, and and making sure that the right decisions are taken at the right time? Is there three aspects to that. One is the leading indicators. And what I mean by that, and of course, when I kind of share examples, it'd be more home to me, which is more IT industry, IT hardware industry, which is where we operate. But again, depending on the industry in which you operate, there definitely will be a lot of leading indicators that you can take cue from. As far as tech industry is concerned, we kind of very closely look at the TAM, which is the total addressable market. The total addressable market keeps shifting, and of course history is, historical trend is one aspect, but then if depending on which industry you operate, what kind of macroeconomic events are happening, etc., that TAM will keep shifting. And I'll give an example. When COVID happened, Japan as the country decided that all the students in, I think, middle and high school are going to be getting a PC, right? Now that critical mass of people, which never existed in my historical trend, and I suddenly see about 1 million to 5 million units being planned for Japan. And I think it was one of the largest deals that Japan announced at that point in time. And suddenly you find all the IT players or the tech industry like HPs, Dells, Lenovo, Asus of the world kind of competing for that piece of the pie, basically. So the TAM kind of resized or expanded. Okay, so that's an example. We closely look at, of course, the GDP growth of the country. I'm sure all of us operate in, length and breadth across the globe, and some markets are more mature, some markets are less mature. So depending on how the GDP growth is existing, you kind of start to plans to say, okay, this is where my install base may grow, or this is where my install base may shrink. Last but not the least, and of course is an example again, you keep continually, during the COVID phase, we continually kept looking at the number of COVID cases just to see if the kind of trends stabilizing, it's going up, it's impacting the country. If you're partner-driven business like we are, or channel-driven business, how does that impact my sell-in, sell-through, etc., etc. So that kind of external leading factors give you a lot of cues to what you need to adjust in your planning. Then moving on to the internal leading factors, which is you kind of keep looking at your order growth, sequential, year over year. You keep looking at your revenue trajectory as to how it's going, mixed within the revenue trajectory. You also look at your backlog situation. If you operate in an industry which has high backlog, a good example, if you ask me in today's environment, and I don't know how many of you face it, there's a huge shortage of automotive out there. So if you go out buying a four-wheeler, you're almost existing on a backlog situation. So, that is an indicator of where you are operating as an industry. If you're a partner or channel-driven business, then of course, looking at your channel inventory levels is an indicator to tell you where you are in terms of your, versus your beyond budgeting, basically. So that's the leading indicator piece of it. If I move on to the weekly exit and monthly forecast, basically, once you have your monthly forecast, you are continuously keeping an eye out there in terms of what events are happening, which could be headwinds, impacting your income statement unfavorably, or could be tailwinds impacting your income statement favorably. Now, in terms of headwinds, if you ask me, again, tech industry, right? So if you're a supply chain driven company where your manufacturing footprint is one geo, your customer base is in another geo, logistics was one of that pieces that critically impacted most of those industry, which has, and most of us operate in that environment from a logistics perspective. So either it was the mix, sometimes air, sea, rail, surface, or it was the rate, right? So it kept fluctuating. So you cannot operate in an environment where you say, I'm going to ignore all those things and I'm going to still meet my budget. That's just a policy. So you kind of operate in an environment where a lot of these things have to be injected back into your planning. Supply situation was not also very encouraging for a lot of those, industry which requires high number of components, etc. So starting from Intel CPU supply shortages 2 to 3 years back, then going all the way from sometimes HDD, LCD panels, ICs, more recently ICs, as I mentioned, automotive industries, ICs is in short supply. So you kind of are always keeping an eye out there as to what the situation is. Am I going to get in time? Not going to get in time? I'm going to supply, etc., etc. So things of that nature are, proved to be headwinds. And again, to each, every industry will have their own headwinds. If I move to the tailwinds, I think these are those good, favorably impacting the income statement. It could be because during COVID, the Japan deal suddenly increased my total addressable market. So I have high demand out there, which never existed before. And Japan is just one of these examples, right? Some country in Europe, most of the North America region required PCs, more PCs for students. So to kind of change my entire demand pie, basically. So the demand increased. Because there was a lot of demand, a lot of the industries which operate with partner and channel had to do less sales incentives, which basically meant that if I would do X percentage sales incentives in the previous year, I'm X minus something this year. So that kind of helped your income statement during those two times. So if you're not keeping an eye on these headwinds and tailwinds, for sure you're not going to be closing or landing on your forecast or quarterly forecast. Last but not the least, why it was important as well, this dynamic never existed prior to COVID. So prior to COVID, if you kind of talk to anybody in the tech industry, the thinking would have been, it is one PC per household. So, household of, husband, wife, 2 kids, typically you define, and then one PC per household. But COVID kind of changed the dynamics. It became one PC per person. So now imagine a house where it had one PC. Now that very house has 4 PCs. So your TAM, or total addressable market, kind of increased 4x suddenly by you doing nothing, right? So now imagine all the IT players trying to meet the demand. So things of this nature will keep recurring. COVID just kind of completely exposed that. And this is not going to go anywhere, right? If you kind of think in the environment, if you exist, this isn't changing. The gig economy, the freelancers that we talk about, the influencers on YouTube, etc., all that is kind of bringing different dynamics to the gig economy as well. So you will see more and more demand go forward. And again, I'm speaking more from a tech industry perspective, but to, depending on the industry in which you operate, you would see those dynamics play out. Last but not the least, I think scenario planning is an extremely critical ability or capability that any company can have. And of course, there's many sophisticated tools out there which now kind of take your smart drivers or the drivers that you input, run millions of algorithms, and then spit out a lot of results for you to review. And we kind of call them baseline. The reason is it's a good baseline for you to know what the tool's telling you, and then depending on your experience and judgment, you kind of layer in what you want to layer in basically. One important point on that which I want to highlight is, there's this belief that that you have smart drivers and then the algorithm will run and then give you an output. But in addition to smart drivers, you also need to have something as we call as shock drivers. And what that means is COVID is a good example. A tsunami could be another example. I think Evo's example about an unrest which impacted the brand reputation could be another example. So I think the thinking got to evolve from just not using smart drivers, but also shock drivers, just to make sure that we have kind of planned it either sides, right? The best and the worst, basically. So I think that's what a good driver-based planning or a scenario planning could offer you in terms of moving beyond budgeting. We move to the next slide. I just want to quickly recap as to what some of the prerequisites of those 2 or 3 aspects that I touch upon today would include. I'd start by saying that 3 aspects, if you kind of have 3 of these working in tandem or in sync, definitely you can move beyond budgeting to continuous planning, and it will be a successful journey. One is people, second is processes, and the third is tools and technology. I think more often than not, when we bring in processes and tools and technologies, I think one of the aspects we forget is about people, which is making sure that we rally a team end of the day who are going to execute these processes and use these tools and technology to believe. I think there's this thing, and again, think of an imaginary divide, which is non-believer to believer, and you will only believe in these tools and technologies once you have a good touch and feel, the tangibility and the ability to use these tools and technologies and navigate yourselves basically. So I think I would say that if you are thinking, if your company is in a stage which is thinking about how do I move beyond budgeting, please don't think about it in isolation of just tools and technology or processes, but kind of think about it as one, working all those things working in sync with each other for a successful journey. With that, I'm going to pause and turn it back to you, Olga.
Thank you so much, Manish. And it's absolutely incredible how in just 2 slides you managed to bring together all the pieces of the puzzle, people, processes, tools, and technology to make sure this journey actually is successful. I would like to invite all the panelists back to us to join us on the camera, put your microphones on, and please comment on Manish's presentation. I will start with you, Steve.
I'd just like to build on that point that Manish finished with about people, and I would just expand it. It's not just about the quality of people sitting in FP&A. I think we need to recognize that one of the things that's changed over the last 10 years, for sure, 20 years maybe, is the quality of people in the business and the fact that they come to work not to just earn a dollar, they come to work to make a contribution. And I think sometimes we forget that the best form of control is self-control. So we need to think as well in all of this, how to use the processes, the technologies to give people the tools so they can do business better by themselves, rather than just thinking them as a way of helping us to control other people better.
Very nice comment, Steve. What do you think, Ivo?
Yeah, so I'm aligned with that, and I also wanted to look at people, and it's also about company culture, which is important. But what is nice for me to see is how we are in such different kind of businesses, in whether it's in food, fast-moving consumer goods, whether it's in technology. But in the end, it comes down to those 3. So how do you organize your process? How do you have the supporting tools, and how do you have the people, one, that can operate in such a circumstances, but also two, and that was what I said also in my comment on the budgeting, that understands what this process means and what it can bring for them. And I really enjoyed hearing the same story from another type of company.
Very nice comment, Ivo. And Pras, can you please comment as well?
Yeah, Manish, some great insights and lots of enlightening statements from you. And it's a few that really stuck with me. For example, is what you talked about how COVID helped expand challenges as well as opportunities. And that challenge and opportunity, as you mentioned clearly, which I think everybody in every industry and everybody that's attending this webinar today needs to address, is it's not changing, as you mentioned. I mean, these challenges and opportunities will continuously present themselves. I mean, just in a rough statement, there are parts of the world that are potentially opening up even more, the other parts of the world that are potentially having further restrictions. And again, these present challenges and opportunities, and especially for finance, as you mentioned, having the ability to do immediate scenario planning and reacting to these challenges and opportunities so that you can service not only your organizations and your shareholders, but as well as your end customers even better, especially those customers that rely on your goods and services, especially in your case, I mean, computers. I mean, how many, I think about my own kids. I mean, we had to buy 2 computers right off the bat last March in 2020, whatever we can get our hands on. And that, again, is going to keep presenting itself over and over again. So thanks for those great insights.
Thank you. Thank you for great insights from Manish and for all your comments, dear participants. So let's move on to our next polling question. So we can put our cameras off and actually let's see what next polling question is bringing us. So let me share with you, is your senior leadership ready to move away from budgets as a control mechanism? I'm launching the poll. So please don't hesitate to vote. So no, having a document to control is important to them. Some parts of the organization are ready. Our senior leaders trust people take the right decisions. What is true for your organization? Is your senior leadership ready to move away from budgets as a control mechanism? No, having a document to control is important to them. Some parts of the organization are ready. Our senior leaders trust people take the right decisions. 67% of you voted. I'll give you a bit more time. People keep voting. Results already visible. More than 70% voted, 73% voted. Oh, very nice. Let me close the poll and let me share results with you. So not really surprising, 66% are saying that no, having a document to control is important to them. 25% of you saying that some parts of the organization are ready. And 9% have voted that our senior leaders trust people to take the right decisions. Let me ask 2 of our panelists to comment on that poll, and I will start with you, Manish.
Sure, thanks, Olga. So I think first of all, the results of the poll don't surprise at all, right? I mean, it's as I mentioned during my presentation, was you have to move from a non-believer to a believer, or in other words, challenge the status quo. So I think it's where people start to have a good tangible touch and feel of how things work when you take budget away, or rather than take budget away, move beyond budget and use, as I think Ivo talked about, rolling forecasts, or in our case, continuous planning. And that's when the confidence levels will go high, and then you kind of see that results shifting a little more towards going more towards the below 2 swim lanes there. So Olga, that may my feedback here. Back to you.
Very nice comment, Manish. Thank you. Pras, what do you think?
Yeah, somewhat surprised that especially not in the no area having 66% still dedicated to a budget. But what I hope to see is that if we look at the last poll where 46% were thinking of moving to potentially a beyond budgeting, hopefully that 25% here that are somewhat ready or ready to move on can really expand that. So I mean, if we do this poll, this webinar again in a year or two, I expect these numbers to be more enlightening, as I mentioned, 66%, hopefully down to 50% or something like that.
Very nice and optimistic comment, Pras. It's actually bring us nicely to your bit about technology as an enabler of better and beyond budgeting. So Pras, whenever you're ready, join us on the webcam, and stage is yours.
Great, thank you so much, Olga. And thanks everyone. So really what I want to do is spend some time right now talking about how Beyond budgeting effectively drives to effectively more agile and effective predictive planning for the FP&A organization. Now, before we get to that, let's talk about some stats that you as an organization, FP&A Trends, brought forward for all of us. Earlier this year, many of you participated in the survey, the annual survey, and some of the insights that we gained from that were that 26% of you find that your time is spent driving actions and insights, which on the flip side mean that 74% of you are doing really what some consider maybe not as value-added tasks as we'd like. What we also found was that best-in-class organizations that produce more accurate forecasts do them in compared to the average are really 63% versus 38% in terms of accuracy, and they also do it in less time, which is 2 versus 8 days. And the next part of predictive planning and scenario planning, and I think that's really important that I'll expand on, is that only 6% of you organizations right now use AI, and 14% plan to use in the next 6 months, but sadly 37% in the next few years. And I hope that 37% reconsiders after today's webinar, because this technology is easy and it's available to FP&A immediately and right now. So let's move on. So how can technology better enable beyond budgeting? So the first thing is moving to a cloud-based planning system to drive beyond budgeting. We talked about beyond budgeting earlier today through the various presenters about how it needs to be adaptable, it needs to be flexible, it needs to be able to adapt to scenarios. The key thing in this case is that it needs to be owned by finance. Finance needs to have its own service level agreement among themselves that they manage a system and that they do it better and they do it with less reliance on IT. And this can be done easily with cloud-based planning tools because they are simple. Everything in the cloud today is simple and easy to use. The next piece about cloud-based budgeting tools is wherever you work with, they come with embedded analytics. And why analytics? Analytics must be needed and used by finance to tell better stories. We saw, for example, when Ivo talked earlier, he talked about the fact that it involves a continuous discussion. Who wants to have a continuous discussion and tell a better stories with an Excel grid that is, aesthetically unpleasing? Rather, having analytics built into on top of your budgets and forecasts on top of your scenarios, it allows you as finance to share and articulate insights and really tell better stories. And that goes also into terms of collaborating in the context of your plans. We know today that as an organizations, we are deeply embedded and work with tools such as Teams or Slack. Imagine having collaboration built right into your budgeting and forecasting tool in the cloud, where you can click on a cell, you can click on a report, you can click on a group of analytics, and then start a commentary, start a discussion, start a group discussion, start a one-off discussion or whatnot, and really talk amongst each other. This helps you move away from the traditional way of doing budgeting where, if you're stuck, you wait for the Monday morning team meetings, you send an email, you leave a voicemail. Rather, you collaborate in the context of your plans immediately and now. As we move on, the next piece is that beyond budgeting, technology can help this by having beyond budgeting enhanced by more agile and predictive planning. And the first part of this is really moving away from scheduled plans and looking at rolling forecasts. One of the things that you'll hear more and more about, and Manish started that with, is scenario planning. Scenario planning is the ability for finance to really look at a scenario, to look at a situation at hand and make a decision immediately and on the fly. So if there's an organization that's spending, as we saw earlier in the poll, 1 to 3 months or 4 to 6 months doing your budgets and forecasts, that means that from a period of June till December, you're effectively in this ongoing cycle of trying to perfect that one cell and create a budget that might be absolutely perfect. And as Ivo talked about, that budget is obsolete the minute it's done. So let's move away from those scheduled plans that, or those scheduled flash forecasts that happen at the start of the month that are due in 3 days, that ignore the other 97% of the month or 97% of the quarter or whatnot, and look at more rolling forecasts as our panel talked about today. And modern technology allows this, where it can be done easier in a more flexible manner. It also brings predictive planning to uncover hidden insights, and predictive planning being AI and machine learning technology that is now easily embedded into your cloud planning tools, so that as you do a scenario plan, you embed predictive plans, and you basically click on a predictive plan that takes that looks at your historical trends plus your human intelligence that you put forward and drives a better predictive plan. And what this allows you also to do is effectively simulate future outcomes. You know, as actually, if we can move back, you know, we heard from Manish, for example, the idea behind scenario planning as well as those shock drivers was the fact that you know, it brought about multiple situations where, yes, your opportunities for revenue might be expanding, but then, you know, your cost basis might be increasing as well, but there might be capacity issues, for example, with COVID, or even now with supply chain. So imagine your business comes to you and says, you know, please tell us about this opportunity, and you have to look at the sales opportunity, the supply chain disruptions, the cost increases, all with various simulations immediately and now. So that's where technology can help. The last piece is where technology can help align all the plans is through the power of FP&A. Through multiple FP&A trends presentations, we've talked about what FP&A is. FP&A is the fact that we recognize that everybody across the enterprise plans, marketing, sales, IT, supply chain. But now with the modern cloud-based planning tools that interconnects all plans and having all common plans on a similar platform, yet maintaining the nuances of each area's planning, that they're all integrated and they create strategic alignment. So imagine a world where sales creates a sales forecast and marketing can look at that sales forecast and decide that they can do more spend or more campaigns to support that sales. Or supply chain or operations could look at that sales forecast and decide whether they can meet the capacity to fulfill those sales that are being called out, or even you know, have an S&OP process to reconcile that. And finally, IT looking at all the you know, the hiring plans from, for example, from HR, and deciding can they meet the IT infrastructure and the requests to, you know, for employees that HR might be looking to hire, whether as contractors or employees, that HR might be looking at from the sales targets or from the supply chain output targets or whatnot. So the idea behind FP&A and having all of this information together in easily consumable manner, and consumable meaning that, again, you're doing it in a cloud-based planning tool that lets you embed analytics on top of all this information. So it's, again, easily visible to the naked eye. So you're able to respond into the moment in terms of market disruptions. So when you have, for example, as Manish talked about, some of these shock drivers or whatnot, it's not a shock to you. It's a shock that you can absorb and make faster and more confident decisions with, and better serving thus your business constituents, your shareholders, as well as everyone, including your customers overall. And now I'm ready for some commentary.
Thank you so much, Pras, for sharing your presentation. And it's really nice how, even though the topic of your presentation was technology, you mentioned all the key elements, people skills that they need to have in order for this journey work, and actually well set up processes all should come together. Please, dear panelists, join us on the camera here and comment on Pras's presentation. Let me start, as always, with you, Steve.
No, it was great. Thanks, Pras. I think what came to mind when you were talking is most people won't know this, that budgeting was a process that was invented 100 years ago. And the person who invented it, or who was the one most successful earlier proponents of it, was Alfred Sloan. And the reason he gave was that it was an effective means of delegation. Because General Motors was the first sort of serious multi-divisional firm, and the reason why it was a means of delegation is that the information wasn't there to enable people to centrally control businesses. And I think that much of the last sort of 50 years has been about monolithic IT structures being imposed, which have facilitated micromanagement. And I think the most exciting thing that we've seen in the last 5 to 10 years is the use of cloud-based technologies, interactive technologies, analytic technologies, which I hope will provide the platform for us to democratize IT. And I think what you've described, I think, has painted a picture of what that might look like.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Steve, for this elaborate commentary. I would move on to you, Ivo. What do you think?
So first of all, thank you, Pras. I think it's a nice closure after first talking about the concept, then seeing two practical examples, then to focus on, okay, what do we need in terms of tools to support all this and to make it efficient? It also made me realize that some of the points in here are actually also touching why we needed to step away from budget, because with certain market disruptions, take a very large inflation. I can remember the days that we were preparing a budget, that there was something really big going on in the market, and we actually decided not to move on with the budget, because if we would make it a target at that point, it didn't make sense. And that's actually stating while budget works for target setting, but not as forecasting, because while in such a situation, it makes sense to perhaps wait for target because it needs to be reachable and challenging. It doesn't make sense, absolutely not, to stop forecasting and to try to understand what it means that this disruption is there. And I think this is clearly stating or showing how it can be supported to understand the different scenarios, at least to try to move and to do the best things you can in business. So thank you very much for sharing.
Thank you very much for sharing your commentary, Ivo. And let us move to Manish. What do you think?
Oh, absolutely. First of all, thanks for sharing. I think two takeaways for me. One, if you are thinking about scenario planning, if you're thinking about agility, if you're keeping into account the speed of business, you cannot achieve any of that without technology. So it's an embedded, you got to inject technology, and of course there's a lot of sophisticated tools out there, as I mentioned. So I think technology is a given. Secondly, I think the one that has really resonated with me well is that you can't think of a budgeting exercise something which a finance professional needs to do. So I think the FP&A term very brings it home for me, which that somebody sitting in IT or customer support or supply chain or procurement, etc., all of them contribute to a good, robust budget. So I think that for me is a big takeaway here, Pras. Thank you.
And thank you, all my dear panelists, for all your commentary. Let us put our cameras off and move on to the next part, which is again polling question to our audience. Let me start next polling question. How do you currently use modern technology in your organization? So let me launch this poll for you. So how do you currently use modern technology in your organization? Either we use technology to empower and drive cultural change, or we use technology primarily as a driver of efficiency, or we use technology primarily to strengthen command and control, or some other option. I see that many people have already voted. How do you currently use modern technology in your organization? We use technology to empower and drive cultural change. We use technology primarily as a driver of efficiency. We use technology primarily to strengthen command and control, or some other option. I see that already 68% voted, 69% voted, 71% voted. I'll give you a couple of more seconds and let me close the poll and share results with you. So we see that the winner is 53%. We use technology primarily as a driver of efficiency. Second option with 32%. We use technology primarily to strengthen command and control. Third option is we use technology to empower and drive cultural change. And 6% have chosen something else. Let me ask our panelists to comment, and I will start with you, Pras. What do you think about the poll results?
Yeah, I guess I'm somewhat pleased with the results, and it shows that there's obviously a lot more to go. I mean, when we use technology as a driver of efficiency, and that's 53% as mentioned over here, that mentions to me that based on the other poll results that there is technology that exists within organizations. There's more technology that can yet be adopted to make better decisions and drive more efficiency, but also strengthen your command and control overall as well. So again, organizations can use this, but the key thing also is make sure that they use the technology to empower, drive, and cultural change. I mean, technology can be a game breaker in terms of communication and collaboration, the way you plan scenarios, bringing in all parts of the business, and really helping finance be a better decision maker, and really not just having a seat at the table, but leading the table.
Oh, very nice commentary from an expert on technology. I'm interested what Steve has to say on the same poll. What do you think?
I think that I hope that if we did this poll in 5 years' time, I'd see bigger numbers in the first box. I think if we purely see technology as a way of doing the same things more efficiently, we're really missing a trick. Really missing a trick.
I see. Very nice comments, everyone. Let me hide the result and move on to our next part, which is actually key takeaways of the session. We have went through key questions, understanding what beyond budgeting is. We went through 2 practical cases. Very nice from Danone and HP. We have talked about technology as an enabler, and we've nicely closed all together, naming that we need all these components: people, processes, culture to work in order to actually go through the journey. Now, I would ask all of our speakers to join me on the camera, and I would ask you to share your key takeaways. If our participants had to take with them only one thing to remember from the whole session, what would that be? I'll start with you, Steve.
All right, it's asking a lot for me to summarize it in one point. So my key takeaway, my personal takeaway is, as you might have gathered from my last comment, a little frustrated. If we're talking here to an audience which primarily Brits, just to point out that we haven't just had COVID, we had Brexit as well. We've had 5 years in which, to put it bluntly, we've looked at next year and we haven't got a clue what's going to happen. And yet everybody's still budgeting, and 66% of the people said that they think it gives them control. I think, what is happening? What is happening here? I don't think we've really gripped this yet. And I kind of appeal to my compatriots. I think we can do better. I think we can do this. This stuff is a source. It's not just about administration. It's a source of competitive advantage. And in many parts of the world, in lots of Europe, lots of companies have taken advantage of this and are getting the benefits. And I'd like to see more companies in my home country really getting to grips with this. And it's not just about competitive advantage. It's about making work more fun and fulfilling as well, because being a budget monkey is miserable, and it doesn't utilize the talents and capabilities of the people we employ. So that's my one take.
Oh, that's very nice. And
that's rather than constructive, but it's honest.
And I really like it. I couldn't help myself not nodding, and I've noticed all other participants nodding as well, so agreeing with you. Let's hear what they think. What the key takeaway for you, Ivo?
Yeah, so indeed, I'm aligned in what Steve is saying, and I think most of you here, you are kind of aware of the downsides of budgeting, and you're just doubting and looking for reasons to convince you to do differently. And I hope today we could give you a few of those insights that can help you make this decision. The thing I want to stress, though, if you make the change, make sure that you do it completely. It's not just saying you stop budget. For me, it's really about convincing your key stakeholders in your company that it's better for you and it's better to animate and to support your business. It's about company culture, and that starts there. It's about making the processes in how you forecast, in how you separate targets, how you can set that up. It's on data. It's on translating data into information to be able to support your business. And lastly, it's about the tools, bringing it all together, visualizing it, and closing the loop of convincing again your key stakeholders that you've done the right thing, because they now understand better where they were and where they might be going. And I hope that's kind of the message that can land to convince you to move beyond budgeting.
Thank you. Thank you, Ivo. Very motivational and engaging for our audience. What do you think, Manish? What is your key takeaway?
Sure. Thanks, Olga. So I think if I were to sit back and listen through this webcast, I think that the key takeaways for me would be challenge the status quo. You have to start doing things and have a good tangible touch and feel for you to believe in those very clearly. Like I hear the term rolling forecast. The reason I have a sense of connection is we do it. So I kind of have a sense of connection. I hear the term leading indicators. We do it. So again, a sense of connection. I hear the term FP&A. We know what FP&A actually means because we are in that environment today. So I have a sense of connection. Would I be having that sense of connection 5 years before had you been invited me here? Maybe not, but because we started to do that touch and feel, and I know what the benefits are, and to Steve's point, you enjoy doing that because you're just not, sitting down and doing some dumb calculations that don't make sense. I think it's, for me, those are the key takeaways, that get into it, do it, be a critic, but at least get into it basically and try it out yourself basically. With that, I'm going to turn back to Yoga.
Thank you, Manish. And very brief key takeaways from Pras. Please go ahead.
Yeah, thanks, Olga. So, I mean, from listening to Steve talking about zero-based budgeting and having a base to start with, to to Ivo talking about the sentiment, the data, the non-financial data, and then Manish talking about the different data elements being needed to make decisions. It's all about the data and having a right technology and right system to bring all the data together, and having the right data, not just to report back on that. It's not a matter of it's for me, it's about moving to, as we talked about today, better and beyond budgeting. Better and beyond budgeting really means that the FP&A group needs to basically, effectively, the enterprise of ship moving forward, they've got to stop looking at the back of the ship and telling us what happened yesterday. Rather, they've got to sit at the front and talk about what's happening tomorrow and the opportunities available tomorrow as well. And that comes with data. And the data is a key asset that'll help FP&A, help the organization move forward.
Very, very nice. I really like this conclusion. And now we can move on to our last part for the evening, our Q&A session. Let me actually ask one question to each of you, and I would ask for a brief answer. The first question will be for you, Steve. Steve, our audience is asking many questions. I've picked this one for you. Performance and incentives are historically focused on budgets. This has to change first to change senior leadership mindset and focus. How can this change be implemented?
Yeah, I mean, that's, as an observation, that's absolutely right. And my approach to this is that, yes, the incentive structures do need to be changed, because if they're locked into budgets, then the whole business is locked into budgets. But for me, my experience is it's looking for ways to decouple, a bit like all of the other processes. Try to decouple incentives from all the other bits of the budgeting process. And so that's the key. The final thing I'd say on this particular point is that while an incentive system can be part of the problem, it is not the solution. So don't think you can get beyond budgeting by fine-tuning the reward system and coming up with cleverer incentive mechanisms. That is not going to get you there. It's part of the problem, but it's not the solution.
Thank you, Steve. And then a question to Ivo, please answer briefly. You spoke about the politicization of the budget and how this was not resolved by rolling forecast. What can be your advice on the topic? So budgets are becoming political, rolling forecast is not entirely solving it. What do you recommend?
It's a very interesting question, and something we keep on struggling with. So one thing is important, and it's as Steve said, it's first to decouple, let's say, a forecast from a target. That's point number one. Point number two, then still, okay, if a forecast is linked into investment decisions, you need to be careful as well, because certain countries or brands want to invest, so it can be biased as well. The main thing we are doing here is to make sure that we start in our forecast from operations, from real supply chain forecasting that needs to predict what needs to be produced, what needs to be delivered, what capacity do we need, and to try to translate that one into financials without having two different sets of forecast, because the first one is coming closer to the reality than the target one with a certain intention.
Thank you, Ivo. And a question to you, Manish. You have described nicely your journey in HP away from traditional budgeting. If you were to go through the same journey again, what would you do differently?
Oh, absolutely. So I think, and again, I can tell you what we did and what I would do differently is I would definitely have bite-sized projects being done in various parts of the company so that people in various parts of the company have, again, a touch and feel. See, I don't think moving from traditional to beyond budgeting is a journey for a handful of people sitting in the CFO staff or the CFO's office or the executive leadership. If you really need to rally your company around that, you need to create these mini projects around the company, run them. Even if it fails, there's touch and feel. And then you keep repeating that all over again. And that kind of starts to change the culture and the behavior and the thinking, basically. I mean, slides is one thing, but actually going through that journey is the aspect I would encourage people to do.
Really nice, touching people mindset. And the last question will be to you, Pras. It's about cloud solutions in the budgeting. In what way cloud solutions can actually improve quality of forecasts? Are they just making this process quicker, or they somehow can indeed truly improve the quality?
Absolutely improve the quality. I mean, if your baseline is legacy planning solutions, or I mean, God forbid, Microsoft Excel. I mean, I know many of us in finance, we love Excel. We love the power of Excel. We're proud of our formulas. We're proud of like the VLOOKUP embedded within an HLOOKUP with multiple VLOOKUPs attached to it with a sideways array. But I mean, ultimately, we're the only ones that understand the formulas, and they're not things that people beyond finance really like to consume. I mean, I know we like to send them out. We love people filling out Excel spreadsheets, but that doesn't really help the overall process. Cloud-based planning tools do help the process because they're accessible from anywhere. Modern cloud-based planning tools are accessible on your laptop, your desktop, your phone. You can effectively view dashboards on your analytical device. If you have a comment, you can click on a cell and effectively just start a group chat like WhatsApp or Teams and collaborate in context. So of course they're improving. And when they come embedded with predictive analysis, imagine marrying your human intelligence with predictive analytics and machine learning so that you could look at a scenario, as Manish pointed out, a scenario plan, and decide, well, this is what potential alternatives bring together in this one scenario, and then you make a decision. So not only does it make the budgeting and forecasting process a lot more efficient, but it makes it so much better because you have more trust in it effectively, and you move away from Excel completely in that sense.
Thank you so much, Pras, and thank you all my dear panelists for answering the questions. And thank you, dear audience, for sending so many questions. We will answer the rest of them in writing. What is left for me is actually just to encourage you to download our FP&A Trends survey for the year 2021. You can do that when you receive the handout. I can also invite you to the 2 upcoming events. Very soon, we'll be having this Digital Central European FP&A Board, speaking about key skills and capabilities for the next decade in FP&A. Something to consider. And the next one, the FP&A Trends webinar, rethinking traditional approach to cash flow forecasting. Somehow connected to today's topic, today we were rethinking approach to traditional budgeting. Let me thank again our sponsor of the event, SAP, leading provider and FP&A solutions. SAP, thank you for making this event possible. Audience, my dear audience, I would like you to connect with us. There are many ways how you can follow us or connect to us in social media. Please do so. My dear panelists, thank you. Thank you for being here, sharing your insights, answering our questions. Thank you all the audience for participation. Let's stay in touch. Have a good rest of the day. Goodbye.